Our story begins in 1547 with Henry VIII's death. Henry's only surviving son, Edward Tudor, was next in line for the throne ahead of his older half-sisters. Although no one knew it then, all three Tudor siblings, Edward, Mary and Elizabeth, would eventually become rulers. Mary ascended in 1553 and Elizabeth followed in 1558. When Edward became king, he was just 9 years old. Since he was too young to rule, a regency council was set up, led by his uncle Edward, the Lord Protector, and Jane Seymour's brother. This arrangement caused tension. The Dowager Queen Catherine Parr, Henry's widow, had expected to act as regent, but found herself left out of government affairs. Edward and Jane Seymour's brother Thomas was also unhappy. Catherine and Thomas had a romantic connection starting in 1543, after her husband Lord Latimer died. They wanted to marry, but Henry noticed Catherine and she had little choice but to become his sixth wife. She made the most of her position by promoting religious reforms and helping Henry restore his daughters to the line of succession. Mary, close in age to Catherine, developed a strong bond with her stepmother. Elizabeth was also close to Catherine, who became her guardian after Henry's death. Thomas Seymour, Edward VI's uncle, was regarded as the most eligible bachelor in England, second only to the young king who was not yet of marrying age. With his elevated status, Thomas sought a bride, possibly even a royal one. According to letters cited by 17th century historian Gregorio Leti, Thomas initially proposed to the 13-year-old Elizabeth, who was 25 years younger than him. While this age gap may seem shocking today, it was common in the Tudor period for aristocratic women to marry much older men. Elizabeth's great-grandmother Margaret Beaufort was just 13 when she gave birth to Henry VII, the first Tudor king. In her supposed reply to Thomas, Elizabeth expressed surprise at his proposal. She wrote that her age and inclination did not allow her to think of marriage, and she was still mourning her late father. The authenticity of Letty's letters is debated. Some believe there is some truth to them, however others doubt their authenticity. The language doesn't seem right, and that Thomas and Elizabeth wouldn't have discussed marriage without first seeking the council's permission. Whether or not Thomas proposed to Elizabeth, he soon reunited with his former love, Catherine. They married just months after Henry's death, causing a scandal and damaging Catherine's reputation. Many believe the 34-year-old rushed into marriage out of desire, but she likely wanted to marry for love after 3 arranged marriages. Thomas seemed to love Catherine, but his feelings were also influenced by her status as Queen Dowager. Both had insights into court life, and Catherine helped stabilise Thomas. She kept him grounded, and he was always prepared to defend her, especially against his brother and his ambitious sister-in-law, Anne. Elizabeth, as Catherine's ward, lived with the newlyweds in Chelsea, but soon after moving in, Thomas began visiting Elizabeth's bedchamber early in the morning. Kat Ashley testified that Thomas first appeared while Elizabeth was wearing a loose nightgown in bed. He greeted her and approached, causing Elizabeth to shrink back, but not forcefully resist. The next day when Thomas arrived, Elizabeth woke earlier to be out of bed, but it would yet be another time of misbehaviour for a man who should have known better. Thomas's visits continued for months, raising concerns as his conduct escalated. Historians believe Elizabeth was like a forbidden fruit for Thomas, who was drawn to power and found her irresistible as Henry VIII's daughter. Elizabeth's response to Thomas's attention is controversial. Today we see a stepfather making advances toward his teenage stepdaughter as apparent harassment. However, the Tudors lived in a different world. Life expectancy was shorter and adolescence did not exist in Tudor England. It was a shocking episode, but perhaps not for the reasons we might think today. People back then saw it as an ambitious courtier taking advantage of a vulnerable young lady. Thomas Seymour, witty and fashionable, was very handsome by the standards of the time and popular with women. He persuaded Catherine to marry him before her mourning period ended and often flirted with Cat Ashley, perhaps to make his advances toward Elizabeth easier. Cat later noted that Elizabeth blushed whenever Thomas's name was mentioned. When Thomas started visiting Elizabeth, she was a sheltered teenager, rarely exposed to men, especially someone as charming as a new stepfather. It's said there was an element of attraction on Elizabeth's part. She found the situation exciting and unlike anything she had experienced before, although it likely became overwhelming. Elizabeth's feelings towards Thomas likely conflicted, combining attraction and fear. Thomas claimed to his wife and Cat that he merely teased Elizabeth and meant no harm. Instead of discouraging him, Catherine joined in some of his antics, even helping him during morning visits. She reportedly held Elizabeth while Thomas cut her black gown into pieces. Catherine might have understood Thomas's true intentions but feared losing his love by confronting him. Like many women of the time, she had vowed to obey her husband, who controlled her affairs and household. Yet Catherine quickly realised their marriage to Thomas was not an equal partnership. In June 1548, Catherine found Thomas and Elizabeth alone, with Thomas holding Elizabeth in his arms. Furious and heavily pregnant, Catherine sent Elizabeth to another estate to protect her reputation and end the inappropriate relationship. Despite rumours that Elizabeth gave birth to Thomas's child, most historians dismiss this as unfounded speculation. Though Catherine and Elizabeth never saw each other again, they mended their relationship through sincere and heartfelt letters. Catherine and Thomas also made amends, coming together in anticipation of their child's birth. Tragically, Catherine passed away from puerperal fever just days after delivering her daughter in September 1548. In her feverish condition, she felt abandoned and accused those around her of mocking her suffering. Although she rebuffed Thomas's objections to this accusation, they made amends before her death. Heartbroken, Thomas initially seemed ready to abandon his power plans. However, he soon recovered and fought even harder for what he believed was rightfully his, no longer restrained by Catherine's influence. Thomas Seymour had multiple goals. He aimed to challenge his brother's control as Lord Protector and hoped for young King Edward VI to rule independently. Thomas expected to gain a significant government position with the king, no longer under his brother's influence. He also believed that marrying Elizabeth, the king's favourite sister, would enhance his standing, so he pursued her again, once asking Thomas Parry about her appearance. Elizabeth was deeply affected by her stepmother Catherine's death, losing a critical maternal figure. Her governess Cat Ashley, fascinated with Thomas, convinced Elizabeth that Thomas had loved her all along and not Catherine, so much so that Elizabeth, lacking other advisors, began to believe this romantic fantasy. In 1548, Elizabeth had little chance of becoming queen. Her brother King Edward VI was young and expected to have children, and even if he didn't, their sister Mary was ahead of Elizabeth in the line of succession. Elizabeth knew her likely future involved either remaining unmarried, marrying a foreign prince for diplomatic reasons, or marrying a great English landowner due to questions about her legitimacy. Elizabeth might have been open to the idea of marrying Thomas. However, she never seriously considered it, recalling her childhood vow never to marry. Elizabeth hesitated, avoiding any commitments without the Privy Council's approval, but eventually the situation spiralled out of control. On the night of January the 16th, 1549, Thomas Seymour, whose feud with his brother had grown intense, showed up at the king's apartments with a weapon. Some say he planned to murder the king, while others believe he intended to kidnap Edward. More likely, Thomas aimed to acquire the person of the king, marry Elizabeth, and bring down his brother. Whatever his intention, the plan went wrong when he stabbed or shot the king's pet spaniel after it had barked. This incident damaged his relationship with Edward, who had been fond of his uncle, but it was bad news for Thomas, who was arrested and taken to the Tower of London the next day. During the investigation, authorities focused on his courtship of Elizabeth. Kat Ashley and Thomas Parry were arrested and imprisoned in the Tower, where they were relentlessly questioned. Elizabeth, only 15, skillfully held her ground, refusing to admit anything until Parry finally confessed in mid-February. The revelations were scandalous and revealing of Elizabeth's time at Chelsea. Thomas is still viewed sympathetically by some scholars, suggesting Kat's testimony might have been exaggerated to protect Elizabeth's reputation. There's also an argument that Kat may have fabricated the details out of a fear of torture. Elizabeth defended herself, stating she had discussed marriage with Thomas but refused to agree without the council's permission. This defence saved her, though her reputation suffered. She presented herself as a pious, respectable Protestant for the rest of Edward's reign, attempting to restore her credibility. But the damage was done and the scandal was disastrous for Elizabeth, as contemporaries blamed her, influenced by her mother's reputation. Despite this, Elizabeth's quick thinking helped her navigate the crisis. The Lord Protector released Kat and Parry after Elizabeth's plea, but Thomas was executed on March 20th, 1549, at about 40 years old. His brother, the Lord Protector, also faced execution in 1552 after a failed coup. Following Edward's death in 1553, Mary became the first woman to rule England independently, but her death without children led to Elizabeth's rise to the throne. As for Thomas Seymour's legacy, well, it is complex. Some believe he wasn't guilty of treason or conspiring to kill the king. Seymour had a great career, highlighting his naval and military service and diplomatic roles, and although his ambition was self-serving, he genuinely believed young Edward could rule independently. Thomas was a likeable yet troublesome gent who nearly married the future Queen Elizabeth. Known as the Virgin Queen, Elizabeth never married, aware that marriage often diminished women's power and status. The example set by Thomas, who died partly for trying to marry her, stayed with her throughout her reign. If you loved our video on this Elizabethan tale, you won't want to miss this next one. Click on the screen now to explore the untold stories and hidden secrets of another fascinating figure with a story to tell. Get ready to uncover more historical gems and intriguing royal tales. Your next adventure in history starts right here.